やれやれだぜ。ドバーン。
This is Hirohiko Araki, a famous immortal vampire who has not aged since he was in his 20s. Oh, and he's also the author of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, a manga that has been serializing since 1986, accruing 136 volumes as of the end of 2024, which is more than One Piece, and it's still ongoing. It's incredibly rare to find a piece of media that has made such a dramatic impact on pop culture as Jojo's Bizarre Adventure, that has spawned countless memes such as and that's just to name a few. The series is known for being really weird, as the title would suggest. Oftentimes absurd and nonsensical things happen for no reason other than the fact that it's hilarious.
Okay, master. Let's kill the whole bee!
Outside of his magnum opus, Araki has led an extremely interesting life. As opposed to many modern mangaka who choose to stay completely anonymous, Araki is quite the public figure, making countless interview appearances and performing various activities, such as the Ice Bucket Challenge. He even had an exhibition in the Louvre. That's right, Kira Yoshikage was in the same building as the Mona Lisa. But how did we get here? How did this one mangaka make such a tremendous cultural impact, not only in Japan, but in the entire world, garnering the attention of the most famous art museum, and single-handedly making countless straight men question their sexuality? Well, let me tell you, it is one bizarre adventure. Hirohiko Araki was born on June 7th, 1960 in Sendai. His real name is Toshiyuki Araki, and he only adopted the Hirohiko pseudonym after his first serialization. His father was an office worker for Japan Tobacco. He had a stay-at-home mother, and he had twin sisters, who he called devils. Despite having siblings, Araki would feel alone because his sisters did everything together, often leaving him out of activities. Every time he came home, his sisters would also eat his share of snacks that his parents would make. He would get into arguments with his sisters, but the girls would cry, causing his parents to scold him for causing the problem. Even in school, his teachers would often suspect him whenever an incident occurred. He was lonely and misunderstood. Although Araki's early life was rife with such misunderstandings, he was extremely close with his grandfather, who would make models and kites for him. Quote, "It was New Year, around 20 years ago. My grandfather and I went to the cemetery to steal bamboo vases used to hold flowers. My grandfather then broke them into long, thin sticks and made me a kite around 60 centimeters wide. In front of the kite, he painted in ink the character for Fly. It was a simple but incredible kite, and it survived the strongest winds." It was at his grandfather's house that Araki first came into contact with manga, movies, and art, which helped alleviate his loneliness. He claimed that manga actually saved his life back then. He also jokingly remarks that if he hadn't gained an interest in manga, he might have gotten out of hand and killed his sisters. During those years, Araki read classics like Ashita no Joe, Babel 2, Star of the Giants, and Osamu Tezuka's works. He even read the first issue of Shonen Jump, which was released in 1968. It is insane to think that this dude who looks no older than 30 was alive during that time. Araki consumed all types of art as a kid, not just manga. He inherited a passion for films from his father. When he was a kid, he once wanted to watch Gamera vs. Barugon, a kaiju film, but instead his father took him to watch A Few Dollars More, the second movie of the Dollars trilogy, which also includes A Fistful of Dollars and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. From there, spaghetti westerns became Araki's favorite film genre, which would directly influence his later works, especially Steel Ball Run. Other than movies, Araki would read his father's art books, where he was introduced to painters like Paul Gauguin, a French painter known for his vibrant colors and simplified forms. It's likely from Gauguin that Araki was influenced to use an experimental coloring style. Other than visual art, Araki also started listening to foreign rock music like Led Zeppelin, even though his mother would chide him for doing so, saying that he should be listening to Mozart. Araki's first drawings were reproductions of Sanpei Shirato's Watari and Tetsuya Chiba's Harris no Kaze, which he believes to have been made in kindergarten or first grade. He was also writing stories about samurais who would fight bad guys, influenced by all the samurai-era manga he would read. He would then attend more art classes and draw his first manga when he was 8 years old. At first, he wasn't sure about pursuing that career, but one of his friends complimented his drawing skills, and sometimes you just need that one person to push you forward. Unfortunately, manga was not very respected at the time, and the adults of his life warned him that he would become stupid. The only way he was able to practice manga drawing was to do it behind his parents' backs. When it came to athletics, Araki was very active as a child, something that would carry over into his adulthood. He played Little League Baseball, but he didn't like the team aspect. He felt that his teammates would look down on him if he made an error, and he didn't like losing because of somebody else. So instead, he joined the Kendo Club. In truth, his experience in the Kendo Club was neither good nor bad since he was never praised for winning. By high school, Araki attended a Protestant school where he read the Bible every day, which heavily influenced his way of thinking. Maybe that's why Jesus is a canonical character in the Jojo universe. In an interview, Araki explained that he didn't actually believe in God, but he did believe that something out there exists. He can't pinpoint it exactly, but he mentions that he believes in destiny, which has always been a core concept in Jojo's story. And as destiny would have it, Araki would soon be taking manga seriously, shortly after starting high school. Araki started submitting his manga when he was only a first year, but all of his submissions were rejected. Still, there were some small victories, such as The Bottle. Araki submitted this one-shot for the Tezuka Award, and while it didn't win any prizes, it got an honorable mention by one of the judges, Hiroshi Motomiya, who wrote, "No one is capable of being an independent manga artist unless they have a story with originality. Out of these, I'm interested in seeing an original story from the artist of The Bottle. Considering his age, it's safe to say that this artist is a very smart and promising newcomer." It's clear that Araki has always had an affinity for originality since the beginning, but after sending in more manuscripts, he still had no luck. One such unreleased one-shot is called Sandstorm, which was only mentioned in an interview with Araki's editor and in the book Hirohiko Araki's Manga Techniques. The original art is now gone, but the story is about someone getting lost in a sandstorm or a boy going to save his sister from a sandstorm. The exact details are unclear. Araki believed the story failed because the sandstorm doesn't make for a compelling antagonist, resulting in a story that is more focused on mood rather than story. Of course, that is not to say that mood-based stories are bad. Think Blam, for example, which focuses on depicting a hostile world as opposed to having complex characters and storylines. Unfortunately, Araki didn't believe he had the artistic ability to create such atmospheric pieces, which is why he believes to have failed the Sandstorm. Then, as if to rub salt in Araki's wound, a manga duo made up of Takashi Shimada and Yoshinori Nakai were already getting noticed by editors when they were only 16. This manga duo would later adopt the pen name Yude Tamago and create Kinnikuman, one of the best-selling manga in Japan. Fed up with all the rejections, Araki decided to visit Tokyo, taking a 4-hour train ride from Sendai. He wanted direct criticism for his one-shot, Poker Under Arms, which he had finished by performing an all-nighter. He arrived in front of the Shogakukan building, which published weekly Shonen Sunday, but the building was too big and he said, nope. Instead, he went to the Shueisha building next door, which publishes weekly Shonen Jump. It was noon when he arrived, and he met with a rookie editor named Ryosuke Kabashima. Spoiler alert, Kabashima would later become Araki's first editor, but for now, Kabashima was a ruthless critic, pointing out everything wrong with Araki's manuscript. For example, Araki didn't even know what whiteout was at the time, so he would have lines that extended beyond the panels. Page after page, Kabashima continued reading, pointing out every aspect that needed fixing. But at the end of it all, there was potential in the work. Kabashima returned the manuscript to Araki and told him to fix it for the Tezuka Awards in 5 days. Araki was exhausted from having stayed up all night to work on his manga, but this meeting with the editor was the first time Araki received such detailed advice. So he took the train ride home, and he would later submit Poker Under Arms, which won the runner-up prize in the 1981 Tezuka Awards. The story follows two outlaws named Don Peckinpah and Mike Harper, who face each other in a game of poker, each one willing to gamble their very lives if it means winning. Poker Under Arms is an incredibly unique manga since there are barely any westerns, even in the current age. With its captivating first page depicting a man falling off a chair after getting shot, Araki is able to hook the readers immediately, which is something he studied extensively. Having read countless manga, he knew that the first page would need to be eye-catching and introduce a unique element that makes the world feel fresh. After Poker Under Arms, Araki published a couple more one-shots. The first is Say Hi to Virginia, published in August 1st of 1981. Araki switches genres with this one, opting for a sci-fi story about a crew of a small spaceship who must defuse 2 bombs, which have been placed by an unknown enemy. The concept of the story is based around the locked room mystery in which a crime is committed in a place where the intruder could not have left. At the time, Araki viewed this type of story as providing the ultimate suspense. The next one-shot is Outlaw Man, another western which follows an unnamed outlaw who runs from detectives just like the unnamed gunman from the Dollars trilogy. Unfortunately, despite all his efforts, Araki still could not crack the code to get a serialization. And so, Araki went back to studying, and this time he focused more on making strong characters, which he found to be the backbone for most major serializations. Even if a manga has no plot, as long as the characters are interesting, they can garner a loyal audience. Araki actually takes the concept of detailed characters to an extreme because this is his character sheet, which is printed in manga in theory and practice. It includes type of voice, history of surgeries, sexual history, and of course, blood type. I've always thought it was weird how anime characters always have a specific blood type, but it's actually because of a prevalent pseudoscientific belief in Japan that blood type can correlate to personality. With the newfound focus on strong characters, Araki went back to work, writing the story for Cool Shock BT, a manga that follows the titular character, BT, and his random adventures with his friend Koichi. Yes, Koichi from Jojo Part 4 is likely a nod to the original Koichi from Cool Shock BT. The main character is based on Sherlock Holmes, which is why the series mainly uses intellectual warfare when it comes to conflicts. This is also the first time Araki would use the pseudonym that he is now known for. It actually took a while for Cool Shock BT to be serialized, a year and 18 months after the first chapter's completion, to be exact. The reason stems from the title. In Japanese, it's written as Mashonen BT, which uses the kanji for devil, and the direct translation is Devil Boy BT. It's a strange title, especially since shonen manga is supposed to be about justice and friendship. So, Araki and his editor had to persuade the serialization committee that there was nothing satanic about the series. In fact, Araki says that BT pretends to do evil with his intelligence, just like Sherlock Holmes, but in the end they both value justice and friendship. Luckily, Araki's editor has a maxed out charisma stat with an expertise in persuasion. He was even able to convince Araki to buy a waterbed despite Araki not actually wanting one. And so, after quite a while of back and forth, the editor was able to get the manga published in Weekly Shonen Jump on November 22nd, 1983. As Araki's first ever serialization, BT was a bit troublesome to draw. He wasn't sure how to bring out his own style, and it took him 3 weeks to draw a single chapter. He would send his manuscripts through mail, and whenever he needed to revise it, he would have to take a 4-hour train ride from Sendai to Tokyo because the Tohoku Shinkansen still hadn't been built yet. But Shonen Jump is famously a cutthroat magazine that doesn't hesitate to axe any unpopular series. Since BT doesn't have a traditional shonen protagonist, it struggled to gain a significant audience and was cancelled. Despite the setback, Araki continued pushing forward with his idea for another series, Bao the Visitor, which would begin serialization in 1984. Up until this point, Araki had been drawing alone in Sendai. The reason he didn't want to move near the publisher building in Tokyo is because he hates hot and humid weather. In fact, his favorite season is winter, and he has made countless author comments about how he hates the heat. For the sake of his work, Araki bit the bullet and made the move, hoping that living in a bigger city would also introduce him to more art and culture, allowing him to further develop his own style. And that's just what happened. Araki found books by painters he's never seen before. He ate food he's never tasted, and he came across designer fashion stores like Missoni and Versace. Originally, Araki developed the idea for Bao the Visitor while still working in Sendai. Since BT focused on intellectual conflict, Araki wanted to switch to something more physical, a battle manga involving bioweapons, which was a hot topic during the 1980s. The story follows a 17-year-old boy named Ikaro Hashizawa who is hospitalized after a car crash and kidnapped by the secret dress organization, who turned him into a bioweapon called Bao. A psychic girl named Sumire awakens him, and together they escape the organization using Bao's powers. Although the quality of Bao is much higher than BT, the series was still cancelled after only 9 chapters. In the same year after finishing Bao, Araki published another short manga, this one being only 2 chapters long, Gorgeous Irene. The story follows a young girl named Irene who lives a double life. One as a regular schoolgirl, and another as an assassin who can disguise herself as anybody by using special makeup. Araki considered turning Gorgeous Irene into a longer serialization, but he decided against it because he didn't feel ready to draw a full shonen manga with a female protagonist, especially since Shonen Jump is catered toward a male audience. It wasn't until 12 years later with Stone Ocean that he did so. While Bao and Irene were short stories, they were successful enough that Araki was able to visit England, which would become the setting for part 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Many ideas came together to form what would become Jojo. For instance, Araki wanted to portray a conflict of generations and traveling heroes. While the main conflicts would still include fighting, he wanted to include spirituality and friendship as well. Next, Araki wanted to include mystery, having been fascinated by deserted islands and cryptids ever since he was a kid. Finally, you have the all-encompassing role of destiny. When you put everything together, you get Phantom Blood, the beginning of JoJo's bizarre adventure, which was serialized in Weekly Shonen Jump from December 1986 to October 1987. In his author's note for Volume 1 of Phantom Blood, Araki writes, "Put simply, this work is about what it means to live. I wanted to examine two ways of living through the two main characters. By depicting the conflict between humans and inhuman creatures, I aim to sing an ode to humanity. This work was made for your enjoyment, and I hope you like it." Part 1 establishes the titular Joestar family alongside Dio, who would become a major antagonistic force for many of the later parts. Before stands were introduced, the original power system for JoJo was hamon, or the ripple, which involves using a controlled respiration technique to make ripples throughout their body that manifests energy that is identical to the sun. Breathing to use powers related to the sun? I wonder why that sounds familiar. The iconic JoJo name was created at a Denny's when Araki was meeting with his first editor, Ryosuke Kabashima. He decided on a protagonist named Jonathan, but Araki also wanted to have alliterated initials, like one of his favorite directors, Steven Spielberg, and so they decided on the name Jonathan Joestar, which would be abbreviated to create the JoJo nickname. It was rumored that Jonathan was named after Jonathan's Family Restaurants, a popular chain in Japan, but Araki and Kabashima both said that this was just an urban myth, and the shared names was a coincidence. Jonathan's design is heavily influenced by the protagonist of Fist of the North Star, another manga that was serializing at the time. As for Dio, Araki wanted the villain's name to sound cool, so what better than the word for God in Italian? When it comes to Dio's design, it was influenced by Roy Batty, the main antagonist of Blade Runner, who had short blonde hair and a muscular build. The first 3 parts of JoJo were actually supposed to be its original run. It was meant to be a trilogy. Araki thought this was the perfect length to tell the conflict between the Joestars and Dio, but Stardust Crusaders became insanely popular, giving him the encouragement to continue the series. While parts 1 and 2 saw Araki still developing his style, Part 3 is a cornerstone. It was finally the point where you could show somebody an image from the manga and they would be able to tell that it's from JoJo. One of the greatest aspects of Stardust Crusaders is the group dynamic, which makes for consistently funny and memeable moments. It's just a bunch of bros traveling around the world.
Help me! Oh my god!
Another important aspect of Stardust Crusaders is its protagonist, Jotaro Joestar, who is arguably the face of the JoJo series itself. He is the ultimate badass, but still has a gentle heart. He was modeled after Clint Eastwood, a stoic man who moves slow and speaks little. Jotaro's pose where he points his finger forward was inspired by Clint Eastwood pointing his gun. Araki notes that Jotaro is his ideal image of a hero, a loner who enacts justice even if he isn't appreciated for it. He doesn't seek compensation or attention, but is willing to do the right thing no matter what. It's pretty cool how in 2012, Araki was actually able to meet Clint Eastwood, and he gave Eastwood a framed illustration of Jotaro. But above all, Part 3 is most known for its introduction of stands, the power system that would define the rest of the series. They are physical manifestations of a person's spirit, boasting a plethora of insane designs and powers. While it might seem like a heavy departure from hamon, you might find something interesting in the way that it is written in Japanese. The first kanji means ghost, dark, deep, or profound, while the next 2 kanji can be read as hamon. To put it together, the kanji for stand can be read as yu hamon, which loosely means ghostly ripple. Although the kanji can be read in that way, the term is first introduced with a set of furigana that reads stando, or stand, which is written in katakana, the writing system that is most often used for foreign words. If you were thinking that stand has some deeper meaning behind the name, it's actually just because they stand next to their users. This concept was first developed because of the need to visually represent characters' powers, and also because hamon became less relevant when used against non-vampires. So Araki turned towards spiritualism for inspiration, namely the Shinto idea of an otherworldly being protecting someone. Another influence was yokai, which are supernatural beings in Japanese folklore. The guardian spirit idea also comes from another manga called Ushiro no Hyakutaro, written by Jiro Tsunoda, which follows a boy who has to deal with supernatural phenomena with his guardian spirit, the titular Hyakutaro. From there, Araki developed the concept more until it became what we now call stands. These powers would become the defining aspect of a character, as Araki would explain that he starts off by inventing a stand power before coming up with the character themselves. In Stardust Crusaders, the naming convention for stands starts off with a tarot card theme, but you've only got so many cards, so he also had to incorporate Egyptian gods. Near the end of Part 3, the character Vanilla Ice had the stand Cream, making it the first stand to be referenced from music. Of course, Araki still made various music references in the early parts of Jojo. For example, the Zeppeli family is named after Led Zeppelin. Basically, the entirety of Jojo is one big music recommendation from Araki. It was also near the beginning of Part 3's serialization, the late 1980s, that Araki first met the woman that would become his wife, Asami, when they both attended their friend's marriage interview. According to Asami, it was love at first sight, though Araki was oblivious to her advances. Luckily, she was able to get his phone number after the meeting. Their first date occurred when Asami called Araki when he was on his way to the pool. He told her to bring a swimsuit and invited her to swim with him. When she arrived, Araki simply told her to play around while he swam laps, and so Asami just sat there, awkwardly. This date was so romantic that they actually got married 3 months after, and have been married for over 30 years at this point. Asami would often tell wholesome stories of Araki acting like a child despite his age, playing ding-dong ditch pranks. Despite his behavior, Araki was still loved in the neighborhood. In 1992, Stardust Crusaders ended, and Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, started. At that point, Araki made the full switch to naming every stand after an artist, song, or album. He cites Prince as his favorite artist because, of course, Prince's music slaps, and they both share birthdays. There just happens to be one major problem: copyright. It's fine in Japan when things are named after Western music, but for the English localizations, many of the stand names had to be altered. Usually the new names aren't that bad, like how Crazy Diamond becomes Shining Diamond, but some are notoriously funny, like how Sticky Fingers is Zipperman, Aerosmith is Lil Bomber, and Limp Bizkit is Flaccid Pancake. Don't even get me started with Filthy Axe at a reasonable price. Anyway, in Part 4, the story takes a major departure from the adventure genre and switches to an interesting slice-of-life comedy. While it doesn't have the same world-ending stakes as its predecessors, Part 4 would cement itself as the funniest part in my personal opinion, having my favorite out-of-context moments of all time. It also introduces a fan-favorite villain, Kira Yoshikage. While it may not seem like it on the surface, Part 4 draws heavy inspiration from horror movies, especially with how they depict horror in everyday life, like a serial killer who lives among us. Part 4 is also where we see further evolution of Araki's style. Due to industry trends, muscle men were starting to lose popularity, so Araki began drawing slimmer characters and leaned harder into his love for fashion. When designing the outfits, he would consider both everyday fashion and cartoonishly bizarre clothing, the type that you would see during high fashion shows. You've also got even more poses which are heavily influenced by artists like Tony Viramontes and Antonio Lopez. Moving into Part 5, Golden Wind, we see Araki fully embrace his style, having the iconic battles, poses, and outfits that would define Jojo. It was at this point in writing the script that I learned that Italian doesn't have the letter J. Man, I don't know how I didn't piece 2 and 2 together. Then in 1999, Araki began Part 6, Stone Ocean, which would see the first female lead, Jolene Kujo. In actuality, Araki thought about making Giorno a woman, but upon discussing it with his editor, they decided that it would be a tough sell for a female lead in a boys' magazine, similar to Gorgeous Irene from before. In the end, Araki made Giorno a boy, but he still remained many feminine qualities. For example, his Japanese name is Haruno Shiobana, which is a feminine name. The stand's ability to create life is also similar to a woman giving birth. Araki even played around with the idea of revealing that Giorno was a girl all along, but he never went through with it. With Part 6, though, Araki finally had enough clout to pull off a female lead. In the early 2000s, having a female protagonist in a shonen manga was basically unthinkable, but Araki was still able to make a hit out of the series. While female leads are still uncommon, there are actually quite a few series in Shonen Jump that now have one, such as Undead Unluck and Akane Banashi. It was during the serialization of Stone Ocean that Araki held a special exhibition in Paris in 2003. This was the first time Araki publicly showed his art, and he did so without informing his Japanese audience, because he wanted non-manga readers to see his art. It all started with a little girl who told Araki that she enjoyed his drawing, even though she hadn't read the manga. This experience made him wonder how people overseas might view his art, so he got to work and made contact with Paolo Vedovi, co-founder of the Vedovi Gallery. The exhibition was a major success. Near the end of Stone Ocean's serialization, Araki thought he had already reached the peak of his career, so he changed the ending to Reset the World. The ending was quite shocking, but it would allow Araki to write Steel Ball Run, which is widely considered to be the greatest JoJo part. Part 7 takes place in an alternate timeline with similarly named characters, and Araki sets the story in the American Wild West, paying homage to the Clint Eastwood films that have influenced him since the beginning. Although Steel Ball Run started serialization in Weekly Shonen Jump, it moved to the monthly Ultra Jump magazine in 2005. By doing so, Araki was able to spend more time taking breaks and working on personal projects. You also see a huge elevation in art quality, with Steel Ball Run depicting some of his most intricate drawings. Among Araki's personal projects were multiple one-shots that were compiled into a singular volume titled Under Execution Under Jailbreak in 1999. He also wrote an anthology manga titled The Lives of Eccentrics, which explores the lives of famous bizarre real people, including Nikola Tesla, the famous inventor, Ty Cobb, the American baseball player, the Collier brothers, who were known for their hoarding, Yoshio Ko, a showman who attempted to air an alleged human-chimpanzee hybrid named Oliver mating with a human on live TV, Sarah Winchester, who constructed a labyrinthine mansion to get away from Civil War ghosts, and Mary Mellon, who is the first asymptomatic carrier of typhoid who spread the disease as a cook in New York City. Yeah, some of these real-life people do seem like Jojo characters. While serializing Steel Ball Run, Araki would also have his exhibition in the Louvre during an event titled The Louvre Invites the Comics, which would exhibit 5 artists in total. For the exhibition, Araki displayed pages from his work-in-progress manga, Rohan, at the Louvre. After Steel Ball Run, parts 8 and 9 of Jojo would continue with the alternate timeline, with part 8 depicting an alternate Morio, and part 9 including an alternate Rohan. But it's at this point that we have to take a step back, because up until the early 2010s, Araki still hadn't gotten a proper anime adaptation other than the OVA for Stardust Crusaders back in the 90s. So why wasn't it until 2012 when David Production picked up the series? It actually stems from a controversy with the original OVA, where Dio was shown to be reading out of the Quran. An Egyptian cleric launched the complaint, halting the distribution of the OVA. Araki even had to redraw the scenes that depicted characters fighting in mosques and destroying them. This is why we had to wait a quarter of a century before the modern adaptation by David Production, which would elevate the source material and boost its popularity to unimaginable levels. But after all this time, working countless years in the manga industry and hosting art exhibitions in the Louvre, it's evident that maybe, just a little, Hirohiko Araki was beginning to be understood.
ようこそ男の世界へ。
As I mentioned before, Araki has made many public appearances, but his personality really shines with his author comments. You see, all throughout his manga career, he wrote a comment at the end of every chapter, and a longer paragraph at the end of every volume. Yes, I did read every single one of them, and I can say without a doubt that he definitely has one of the most personalities of all time. Did you know he likes gardening? He has a garden outside of his studio where he used to cultivate things like tomato plants. While he's usually a shy and calm man, according to his wife, Araki admits to having certain angry seasons where he would just be angry at a lot of things. He would also get irritable whenever people called him during work. He attributes this disparity in his personality due to being a Gemini. Araki is often asked by his friends, if your house was on fire, what would you take? At first he said nothing, but after much thought, he realized he would search for his 900 yen notebook, his diary for the 2 months between June and August of 1979. But upon reading about his past self, he is moved to the point of tears. The most frightening thing that ever happened to him was experiencing hail for the first time. He had never heard of ice falling from the sky, so one day when he was playing in a field and hail started falling, he thought the world was going to end. Araki actually claims to have seen a ghost one time when he traveled to England. He stayed in a hotel that used to be an old castle. He went to bed early at 8 o'clock, but a few minutes after laying down, a spectral woman came through the slightly opened bathroom door. There was blood on her wrists. At first, Araki was freaked out, but then he thought, I'm really sleepy and I don't want to deal with this right now. So the woman disappeared, and that's how you defeat every horror movie ghost. Italian cuisine seems to be Araki's favorite type of food. He always uses an Italian restaurant for meeting places. In chapter 420, Araki comments that he went to a lingerie fashion show. Here are Araki's top 10 fears: death, organisms that can cling to the ceiling, like cockroaches, delusions, his acquaintances, getting an unlucky fortune, hospitals, destruction of the environment, confined spaces, strangers, the dark. The real reason Araki became a mangaka comes from a story when he was little and visited the doctor because his mother needed some medicine for her cold. When Araki arrived, the doctor told him, "Alright Araki, roll up your sleeves, it's time for your shot." Araki was terrified, but it was only a joke. Looking back, Araki believes this experience is what truly led him to become a manga creator. For some reason, Araki tried eating cattle brains and he loved it. Yeah, I don't think that type of cuisine is for me. Araki's top 5 favorite toys are glow-in-the-dark skeleton figurines, bouncy balls, Resident Evil, a plastic model of Thunderbird 2 from the Thunderbird series, and lastly, Legos. According to his mother, he had a superpower to sense whenever doctors were near because he hated doctors so much. I wonder if we'll see this stand ability soon. In Steel Ball Run's Volume 7 and 8, Araki has a midlife crisis. Quote, "I've realized that I've reached my mid-40s. If I'm to live to the age of 70 or 80, then I've already passed the halfway point. This is a bit of a difficult topic to write about, but I'm starting to wonder if I'm alright the way I am. Am I walking the right path? Sometimes I wonder what the right path even is. I wonder what would happen if I were to go down the wrong path in pursuit of love or justice. What are the right and wrong paths, and how are we supposed to distinguish between the two? Will anyone ever tell us? If we hurt the ones we love because we love them, how can we escape it? Oh, and also Araki peels cherries every time he eats them, for some reason. According to Araki's wife, the secret to his youth is yoga and sunscreen. In fact, Araki avoids the sun as much as possible, which checks out seeing that his favorite season is winter and he hates the summer. There's so much information about Araki's personality that I could probably fill out the character sheet that he uses for manga. He is truly a character in and of himself. Someone who, just like all of us, is just a little bit bizarre. With a career spanning over 40 years, Hirohiko Araki is more than just a mangaka. He's an artist who has reshaped the boundaries of storytelling, fashion, and expression, creating a story that has transcended the page to become a cultural phenomenon. Through his early life, Araki reminds us that dreams aren't achieved overnight, but are built through constant, consistent effort and staying true to oneself, just like the stoic protagonist that Araki himself admires. His ability to innovate and entertain audiences has no limits, and neither does he. His stories are wild, unpredictable, boasting a sense of eccentricity that seems random, but even to the present, Jojo has maintained one main theme. It's an ode to life and a celebration of humanity.